Hello, good morning, and welcome. It's Tuesday, the 23rd of March, 2021, and we're back with episode 187. Before getting started, just a belated Nowruz Mubarak to all my Persian friends and colleagues. It's a happy new year for the Persian community, and of course, a happy first day of spring this past Sunday to everybody else. So today's episode is brought to you by The Information. Stay tuned, and I'll be hooking you up with 75% off your first month just for listening to my podcast. So my guest today is Alan Witters. He's the CEO of T4L, that's Transportation for Life, a brand-agnostic electric vehicle subscription service that already has over $3 million in pre-orders and is already eyeing an IPO. They've also got a WeFunder page, which you should check out at wefunder.com/T4L. Anyway, hope you're sitting comfortably because 40 Minutes with Alan Witters, the CEO of T4L, begins now. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Yeah, we're having some fun times with T4L right now, and our other projects too. But this T4L is really taken off.
I mean, that's certainly good to hear. And I guess now's as good a time as any to kind of cut to the chase with respect to exactly what the name is. And I'm pleased to say that I didn't totally botch this when we first chatted a few weeks back, but Transport for Life.
Transportation
good
for
reason
life.
too. Transportation for Life, right? Sorry. Well, look, I mean, I'd love to just kind of suggest hand it off to you and give kind of the backstory for all this because, frankly, as you know, I've been super intrigued by what you guys are up to. It's a pretty novel idea, so I'd love to just have you take it from the top, really.
Okay, cool. Well, Marc, thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
T4L, Transportation for Life. We formed it last September. But prior to forming it, we one of the things we always do with every company that we think about incubating or starting or getting involved with is we validate our thesis. Well, first you got to write the thesis. And what germinated the thesis was I was thinking March or May or April sometime last year, I'm listening to Elon Musk say we got to get the cars cheaper for everybody. And, I started thinking about that, and I'd faced some of the same things 20 years ago in the IT business, in the networking business, and in where computers were hundreds of thousands of dollars for workstations. And it's like, how do we make them cheaper? And so we started back then. We created a utility model that went and bought all the capex, and then we started basically selling services on it on a per megabyte or per minute basis. And I looked at electric cars and I said, those are really expensive things. They're almost the price of a house, a mortgage. And I said, we know how to make those cheaper for everybody by taking all the capital out of the equation pretty much and turning them into a service model. And we looked at it and we said, this looks really similar with electric vehicles to the aircraft management business, and it is basically needs to be cars in the cloud or transportation as a service.
I mean, you took the words out of my mouth. I mean, it literally sounds like you're applying the cloud service solution to vehicles, and in this case, privately owned or semi-owned vehicles, as it were.
Absolutely, and we've even built on top of that presence, and we look at the actual vehicle, as a service delivery platform now. And similar to the internet delivers services to people of all kinds of things, we think the cars are going to be delivering services also. And I'll get into that in a little bit here. But we looked at this and we said, with electric vehicles, their life is 400 to 600,000 miles per chassis. They have 70% less moving parts. It means that they can be maintained much easier. And their depreciable life is extended way 2 to 3 times more than an internal combustion engine vehicle. So there we started saying this is an actuarial model. And as an actuarial model, we can look at this and we can look at all the things that are causing issues with car ownership. 10 years ago, a decade ago, Uber and Lyft and all the transportation mobility as a service companies came out and really started changing people's attitudes towards car ownership to car
Mm-hmm.
usership. And we looked at that, and we looked at the Amazon client first model where, a client shouldn't have to have any questions about service. It just
Yep.
gets taken care of for you. And then we also looked at how everything's digitized nowadays. Even my mother-in-law and my grandmothers, everybody has a cell phone or a digitized device in their hands nowadays. So a lot of convergence of things going on that allows us to deliver uh, a service that just makes sense and is actually ends up being lower cost than car ownership, much more reliable, and much more flexible.
And so just to be clear, what's the actual burden being removed from the consumer? So in other words, for what's what is the alternative? I mean, is this an attempt to abandon or at least step away from the traditional model where you walk in to a dealership, or in Tesla's case, open up your app and buy a car, and then that's what is that? What is the burden being removed here?
So I'll start with the number one pain point. Do you like sitting at the DMV?
Not particularly.
Okay. Do you like having to pay taxes and registration on your car every year?
Nope.
Do you like having to go into a car dealership and haggle with a car dealer?
No, but to that point, hence Tesla, which has effectively eliminated that. But
Yeah,
point
and I
taken.
think that's an absolute stepping stone model to what we're doing.
Yep, agreed.
Um, and what's interesting is that we extend the life of the vehicle. And so we actually are disintermediating a couple of different people in the food chain. The automotive dealer franchise model is about 100 years old, and it's ancient, and it's not very client friendly, and it's got a lot of insider dealings going on and things like
Yeah.
auctions and stuff like that. And um, it takes advantage of consumers. And we said, there's a better model here where if we take care of our cars and treat them like an airplane, and we put aside reserves for the brakes and the tires and the batteries and actual refresh of the car, and treat it like an airplane that will get a new interior or a new paint job. That's the way we looked at it. We're going to basically hold these cars for 20 years. Now we'll have some shrinkage due to accidents and things that can't be repaired, but we also are a very ESG conscious company,
Mm-hmm.
and we will recycle the vehicle down to its base materials if we need to. Okay.
Oh,
So this is a new way of dealing with these things. Now, does it sell more cars? Not really. For the manufacturers, do we buy more cars? Yes, because our model will be very, very popular. And it actually makes more margin for the car manufacturers and for the insurance companies than their current model, because we disintermediated car dealerships and we disintermediated automotive insurance brokers and agents.
how does this compare or not with some of the recent announcements from some of the other automakers when they started testing? I won't say fully deployed because I feel like they were always kind of in perpetual test mode. These various subscription models. So, for example, I think Volvo did or still does this. Mercedes were doing this. Porsche, I think, started doing this. So fundamentally, it's a subscription model to a car, right? I think even GM actually did this for a
Mm-hmm.
while, right? And the idea was you could sort of get whatever car in their portfolio that you wanted within every 2 months or something, right? Is this similar or dissimilar to that?
We have some similarities and we have complete dissimilarities. Number one is they're trying to force a subscription model in that is benefiting their manufacturing and dealership channels, which means they're very, very expensive. You can get a BMW 5 Series for $3,500 a month, I believe was the last price I saw.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's sort of ridiculous that
Hmm.
same car. They're burying in all the risk of return. They're burying in a short term lifespan of the vehicle, and that's counterintelligent to what the market wants. So what the market wants is affordable, really reliable, high touch service, and not to think about their car. Um, so we offer a perpetual subscription program. You sign up with us, and every 2 years you can swap the car out. We also have a flex fleet program where you sign up for a number of time and mileage, and it can be from 1 day to a year and so many miles. We also have a couple of plans for executive fleets, which is actually where we're selling most of our subscriptions to. And then we actually are working on some really interesting things for condos and uh, where we have a lot of people living in high density housing. Um, where I live in Florida here in Naples, we have 99% of the cars are sitting around all the time, and there people might be here or they might be snowbirds and they're up north. And
Hmm.
so by us putting 5 to 10 nice, really nice electric vehicles, Teslas, at a condo and it's shared by everybody is a benefit to everyone because then the price is a shared vehicle price, which is $300 or $400 a month, and you're driving a $120,000 Tesla.
So this is awesome. So this is kind of taking the same idea as many apartment buildings, condo towers, resorts, how they often provide, for instance, on location charging infrastructure. They provide, say, bicycles, for instance, or
Yep.
whatever, right? So here it's kind of essentially taking that, extrapolating it out to an actual vehicle that you can use.
Yeah, and one of the things that we're right now in early concept development of is our T4L electric vehicle experience centers. And these are multi manufacturer represented vehicles that are in our subscription fleet where people can come in and get the electric vehicle experience, sign up for a subscription, get charging done, maintenance done on their vehicle, pick up a flex fleet vehicle, and probably a cup of coffee, if you know what I mean.
No, that sounds great. And I mean, what? So, I mean, it sounds like you're predominantly working with Teslas now, or is the plan to expand outward to other brands in due time, or what?
Yeah, we have a relationship with Tesla. We have a relationship with Nissan. We're
For
working
the
on,
Leaf, presumably.
yeah, the Leaf,
Hmm.
and,
Yep.
and the new one they're coming out with, which is a really nice looking SUV.
Hmm.
We have discussions going on with VW, Porsche, the whole
How about
VW.
Jaguar for the iPace?
So we haven't approached Jaguar or the I-Pace. They might be a logical choice. We typically look for vehicles that have at least 200 miles range. We are also in discussions with Ford and GM, all the VW group, Porsche, Audi, and those people. But almost everyone doesn't have vehicles ready yet. And we're seeing first availabilities being, late 2021, early 2022. And there's a lot of dynamic going on in the EV marketplace right now.
Yeah, but I mean, speaking of which, your timing couldn't be better, right? Especially now with Volkswagen having announced the launch of their new ID4 brand of electric vehicles. I mean, it's pretty great timing.
Yeah, and all the new trucks that are coming out
Yeah,
as well.
Rivian, for example.
Yep. Um, so our expectations is by the end of 2022, we'll probably have around 30 different electric vehicle model makes and types.
Yep. No, that sounds about right. So I mean, can you flesh out a bit more detail just so folks really understand at a sort of practical level? So who's I mean, so the end. I mean, can we call them owners still because they are effectively owning the car as opposed to leasing it, right? I mean, they're
They they're
essentially.
they own a subscription to use the car. We own the car. We take all the capital risk. We take all the operating risk. We fully insure the vehicle, and the insurance is absolutely the best insurance in the world. Much better than most people ever put on their car, including $1 million liability policy per
Nice.
vehicle.
Hmm.
Um, our subscriptions include charging, and they also include a home charging station if you can put one there.
Really?
Yep.
Well,
And
that's very cool.
yeah, we're just finishing up our T4L charge card, no pun intended. Uh, so yeah, that card will be usable at every third-party charging center in the United States is what we're working on. Uh, and we're also working on an interesting app uh, for all the vehicles, not just a Tesla vehicle or a Nissan vehicle, but for all the vehicles.
So hang on. With respect to the charging, providing chargers for somebody's home if they can do it there, paying for the charging. I mean, this is huge. I've always said, I still maintain that Tesla became Tesla because they didn't put the cart before the horse, as it were. They realized they had to have the supercharger network built out. I firmly believe that if they hadn't had that, they just would have never caught on in the first place. So it seems to me that if you guys are effectively handling this, or I say handling, if you're effectively removing this charging burden from folks to switch over to an electric car, not just for those who are hesitant to do so, but for those who cannot do so, this seems something that manufacturers would be jumping all over.
Yeah, and again, we're a really young company. I mean, we're just putting first cars on the road here now. So, until we've proven the model out and we've got 100 cars on the road or 1,000 cars on the road, I wouldn't expect a manufacturer to gain their attention at this point. We're just sort of a blip.
No, I
But
was speaking pro. I mean, admittedly, I was speaking proactively, but and affectionately as well. That this is definitely something that just seems like a fantastic, uh, you know, go to market strategy for anybody getting into the EV space right now.
yeah, it is, and I believe as you see the social and behavior changes around transportation that we're seeing at early stages of. Again, I what I said earlier, this is a service delivery platform, the vehicle is.
Right. Hmm.
And we have a whole slew of services that'll be offered through that vehicle because remember, we have a captive audience in the car. We know who they are. They're in a membership arrangement with our company. And we understand buying patterns, spending patterns, all kinds of different things. And we have constant communications to that vehicle, both in and out. And so you'll see us offering some really, really interesting services. And ultimately, our goal is to get the car price down to nothing per se, and the car is just delivering lots of high value services and the revenue associated with those.
So this kind of reminds me, in a sense, the way that, yeah, it kind of reminds me of, frankly, cell phone, the way the whole cell phone model works, right? Like, in a
Very
sense, at
similar.
least by analogy, right? Providers are essentially subsidizing the cost of the physical phone to get phones in everybody's hands. In a sense, is that kind of what's happening here?
That's what's happening. I would say that's a really close analogy.
Right. And this then kind of loops into your comment earlier, whether it's residential condo buildings and potentially, then I would guess, even offices, companies, right? Offices today provide their employees with phones and tablets. Why not provide them with phones? I mean, obviously, certain types of professions, I guess sales jobs have often provided cars as a matter of course, but this then could extend that far broader to more employees potentially, right?
Yeah. So what's interesting about our current pre-order stack is 70% of it is executive fleets for companies.
Oh yeah, okay, so that makes sense.
What's really interesting about that is an electric vehicle is a really good perk to give somebody.
Yeah, totally.
It also prevents 10,000 pounds of carbon going into the atmosphere. So it helps companies hit their ESG goals.
So that is a really good point. And
Oh,
if you're
yeah.
helping them achieve that, then why not? Yeah, that's amazing.
So when we talk to companies, we basically get the attention of the boardroom. And we're in discussions on placing 3,500 vehicles in some large accounting and law firms right now for their partners.
Hey, just a few words about the information. I've told you quite a bit about them lately, and with good reason. They are by far and away the greatest source of tech news I've ever discovered. Not the usual clickbaity tech tabloid type stuff you get from all the other usual tech news blogs. The information is really just good old fashioned deep dive investigative journalism at its finest. I've often described it as being sort of what The Economist would write if they did a tech news journal. And like The Economist, the information is also going after the founders and executives and leaders of the tech and business world with stories that really matter. They also have incredible resources for subscribers, like, for example, company org charts, and they host fantastic events like last year's recent AV Summit, something I think all of you would have loved to have attended. Anyway, look, just give them a shot. I promise you'll thank me when you do. Head on over to theinformation.com/Hoag and get 75% off your first month just for listening to me and my podcast. Again, that's theinformation.com/HOAG. Wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and that's a good perk. It's affordable, and it's good for the planet.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And kind of drilling down into that cell phone analogy further, you mentioned earlier one of your plans is a so-called flex plan. You said you can essentially prepay for either or both of a time basis or miles basis.
It's a time and mileage. You have to pay for both at the same time, and think of it as like almost like a boat club or airplane club.
Yep.
Where you are a member and you sign up for so much time, and everything we do is based on a minimum usage model. We have no usage limits. You can drive unlimited, but you're going to lock in at that price per mile no matter what. And if you commit to more miles, you get a discount on mileage.
I mean, not to overuse the analogy, but to overuse the analogy, that's again sounding a lot like cell phone models, right? So on the unlimited plan, they assume that people pay for all this unlimited data, but 99% of customers won't actually use it. So the same idea here, right?
Yeah, well, just think of it. Go back to cars in the cloud.
Yeah.
And everything is usage based, and the more you use, the better deal you get.
Yeah, exactly. So we've seen a similar shift then in with insurance providers too, right? So I think the most popular one these days for usage-based insurance is Metro Mile, I believe. Same idea, right? So get people to just pay for what they use.
Yeah, and we actually actuarialize everything on the miles, so it's real easy for us to add a new service and figure out what it's going to cost per mile.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, very cool. So another question, just to kind of, shall we say, compare, contrast, learn from other experiments in this direction. So I actually was one of the 7 people who tried GM's Maven back in the day. I'm joking. I actually thought it was a fantastic thing, and I don't know why it ultimately didn't take off. I'm frankly just going to put you on the spot and ask you if you have any theories why not. Because to me, and the one time that I used it was with my wife. We were in DC. We literally needed a car for, I was going to say a day, but not even a day, like for an afternoon to drive from DC to Maryland and back again. And there was no viable way to get a rental car at an affordable price. And it turns out there was a Maven, I don't even know what you call it, like a place to pick up a Maven vehicle at a local hotel there, just steps away from where we were staying. And it worked great. Just picked it up from the valet at the hotel. No gas, no insurance. It was super, super simple. I loved it, but it didn't work. I mean, if only as a case study discussion, have you given this any thought? Do you have any idea how or why this didn't succeed?
Probably too early to market.
Oh, well, that's certainly possible. I guess if ever there was an example of the simple solution being the right one. Okay, fair enough.
That's there has been a lot of false starts in the last 20 years in both electric vehicles and in subscription models.
True.
I mean, and I'm a futurist, and almost everything I do is 10 to 15 years way early to market. And fortunately, I took stuff we were doing 15, 20 years ago, and I applied our business modeling to this market, and it seems to be timed perfectly. Other than that, I would say that a lot of stuff has been way too early to market. I think that you also get what I call tries in the market. Every one of the manufacturers is trying to do a subscription model,
Yeah, true.
That's not a commitment to the market. Volvo is probably the most committed to the market with subscriptions in their care program, and
Hmm.
it's because you have to take a very long look and a very long view, and you have to be able to manage those vehicles beyond the time they leave the manufacturing floor, which is really hard for automobile companies to do and even dealers to do. They just want to move the inventory and get that order.
Yep. No, I hear you. Absolutely. I mean, frankly, if nothing else, it'd be a little bit weird if other folks weren't trying, as you say, to do this. It'd be weird if GM hadn't tried with Maven. Never mind that they failed. If nothing else, all these other attempts actually validate this idea. If it were, if it were an awful idea, nobody would be trying it. This is great, actually.
Well, understand that a subscription model goes against selling new cars because we
Well, that's
extend the
true.
life of the vehicle on the road.
That's true. But I mean, to your point earlier, at least that you alluded to, I mean, the very essence of an EV effectively, by some metrics, goes against traditional dealerships anyway, if only by virtue of the fact they require essentially no maintenance in the way traditional cars do. And if I'm not mistaken, most dealerships make the vast majority. I mean, sorry. Well, yeah, dealerships certainly, but also manufacturers make a ton of their money off maintenance, right?
You just nailed the problem in the industry.
Huh. Yeah. There's almost an incentive to keep this alive.
Yeah, it's they. You know, my concern for the future is that the electric vehicle manufacturers start planning and building in forced obsolescence.
Totally agree. Well, this is obviously what folks have joked about with Apple forever, right? That your Apple i devices are, yeah, they're literally forced into obsolescence after what, 2 years?
Yep.
Yeah, that's
Yeah. You know, fortunately, there's a lot of mechanic. You know, these are mostly physical devices, and they've made the software flexible enough. But I'm sure that we're getting near the end of life of some Teslas because of not because of vehicle life, but because of software life or forced obsolescence.
yeah. I mean, I have already gone on the record being a bit mm, unpleasantly surprised at our battery capacity reduction after just 17,000 miles of driving. So I can imagine a lot of other people might be having a lot of similar concerns. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I mean, it would be super weirdly, it would be a weird twist of irony if that were the case, though, right? Because obviously, one of the biggest selling points of Tesla is precisely that that they do not become obsolete, if only because of the software updates, right? And indeed, we've seen so many other automakers, Ford especially now with the admittedly brilliant Mach E, which also has pretty comprehensive software updates, if I'm not mistaken. But I agree with you. There would almost be that sort of an incentive. On the other hand, I guess one way around that, which is a bit less cynical than forced obsolescence, might be moving moving every essence of the vehicle experience to a subscription model, right? So, for instance, if you look at Tesla, it's been known for quite a few years, and indeed this year it'll probably occur, that if you wanted to add full self-driving, you can no longer purchase it outright. It has to be a monthly subscription, which, I mean, if the math pans out the way it seems to, it's going to be at least $100 a month. I think even BMW, for instance, decided to add to kind of move to a subscription model, various options that you could formally just sort of check off the purchase list. For example, heated seats, heated steering wheel. If you want those, well, it turns out they're already baking them into every new car, but you have to software activate them with a subscription. That seems, I think, perhaps the less. I mean, I'm not saying I'm a fan of that necessarily, but that seems rather less cynical an approach, an alternative to forced obsolescence, right? So either way, you're right though, because EVs are going to be real. They're going to have incredible longevity. So you're right. What do you do?
Yeah, and I actually think we would embrace that because it allows us to then share revenue and actually actuarialize those enhancements in our model. So
That's a good point.
it doesn't really matter to us if they do that. I'm expecting to see fully software deployed options in cars across all of them in the next 5 years. You know, oh, you want air conditioning? Well, you got to pay $5 a month for that.
Yeah, it's funny. I feel like depending on whom you ask, there's always these different opinions on subscriptions. I've certainly been all over the place myself. For certain things, I absolutely love the idea of subscriptions. I feel like for larger ticket items, I think obviously these tend to be preferred, but for smaller items, they tend not to be. I don't know. I guess it totally depends, honestly. Um,
Yeah, we're hitting the price point of electric vehicles that are basically larger than some mortgages on houses. So,
well, that's
it
true.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Well, look, I'd be certainly remiss not to, you know, a lot of people often have asked since the very beginning. So, do I individually, but also on behalf of the podcast or even our firm for that matter, do we only care about autonomous vehicles? The answer is obviously no, is demonstrated not by just by this, but also many other conversations I've had in the past. Obviously, uh, there's so many ancillary and necessary developments that need to occur, chief amongst them, not just electric vehicles in general, but crucially, car sharing, or in this case, a new model altogether for car ownership, in this case, subscriptions. That said, I would be remiss not to loop this back to autonomous tech specifically. I'm just sort of curious the extent to which, or the impact or influence on what you guys are doing as well. Let's just continue to pick on Tesla since you're already working with them predominantly, at least, insofar as getting subscriptions for these. What is your thoughts on the impact on what you guys are doing as we get better and better levels of autonomy?
Um, so, from our perspective, it's just automating the driving of the vehicle and actually giving our captive audience more time for us to offer services to.
Well, that's a good point.
So, this is where we come back to that vehicle is basically a service delivery platform, and you're going to have private vehicles, you're going to have all different classes of vehicles. You're going to have shared vehicles, private vehicles, ones that are, a person has subscribed to, that's their car, or a group of people have subscribed to, that's their car. Or maybe with autonomous vehicles, you don't pay your bill and the car comes back to our garage.
that's that's actually kind of cool. I'm just kind of picturing that now. That's awesome. Um, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And what happens in this scenario? So I'm not even going to give a time frame on this because depending on whom you ask, the projections vary wildly. What happens in the eventual scenario? Again, just picking on Tesla for a moment. They've deployed their robo taxi fleet. The idea being that your car, which, as you correctly state, is effectively dormant or sedentary 99% of the time, not actually being driven. The idea is, of course, well, now it can be autonomously driving around, picking up passengers, essentially generating passive income for you, the owner, right? Such that
Mm-hmm.
I guess the holy grail is to at least reduce the cost of the vehicle to zero, which is also effectively, in a sense, what your goal is too. So I guess my question is, with this subscription model of sorts, would this be in conflict with, or is this something you guys would wholly embrace? The ability for folks to,
We
I
wholly,
guess,
we wholly embrace it, and we actually
okay,
in our fleet, one of the options that a subscriber can do, especially for people like who are snowbirds that come to
uh-huh,
Florida all the time,
yeah,
they can actually enroll their perpetual subscription car into our flex fleet and offset their payments through our flex fleet.
really,
Yeah.
wow,
And so when they come back, their car comes back. It's all been refreshed, cleaned out, or whatever. And they've got a car for 3 or 4 months while they're here in Florida. When they go back up north, that car goes into a flex fleet. It's being used and offsetting their costs. They probably think of it as the owning a charter boat in the Caribbean, and you're chartering out to lots of people, and then you get to use it for 4 or 5 weeks at a time, or 6 weeks at a time yourself, and it doesn't cost you anything then.
I mean, this is remarkably awesome. I mean, it's sort of compelling me to ask the question, not even in a devil's advocacy kind of way, but in a literal matter of fact sort of way. Like, it almost seems absurd to own a car any other way besides this. Like, why would somebody not choose to do this?
Well, that's why myself and the team and everybody are doing this. Is it I got rid of my Volvo lease about 4 or 5 months ago, and it's like I don't need to have all the pain. Uh, you know, let 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 this company handle all that for us.
Yeah, I mean, so for instance, so whether you're looking at some of the actual car sharing platforms, be it Turo or whatever else is out there. And indeed, many of the rental agencies now are also doing car sharing of their own. I think Sixt does this, for instance. I mean,
Yep.
I can very easily see, and indeed even make up my own arguments for why, if only because I'm such a car guy, why I wouldn't necessarily want to do that. I actually like that emotional bond with my own car that's mine, and whether or not I share it out to others, I want to know at the end of the day, this is my car specifically. So I can understand arguments against that sort of a thing. But here, I mean, frankly, whether you're buying it outright, leasing it, or in this case, subscribing it, where it is effectively your car, who cares what the model is? This is just so much better. So I'm just not seeing any argument that would invalidate this in any way.
Yeah, I would say save your money for that real rare sports car or antique
Yeah.
classic that you want to go out and polish on Sunday mornings and drive around.
Hey, that's actually a really good point. I have to then pick on. That's a really good. So yes, totally agreed. But that's a good question. So do you foresee any sort of, like, shall we say, use case limitations? So for example, not that I foresee too many people taking, say, a Nissan Leaf, with all due respect to the Leaf, to their neighborhood racetrack to run a couple laps on a weekend. But I could see a bunch of folks subscribing to, say, a Tesla Model 3 Performance, and for sure taking that to a track. Is there any reason to anticipate any sort of use case limitations that would preclude any sort of usage that one would ordinarily do with an ordinarily owned car?
Yeah, absolutely. We have those limitations because of liability and all kinds of other legal aspects of it. But on the other hand, there's a really high probability that we will actually have subscriptions just for that purpose too.
You took the words out of my mouth. That's where I was going with this. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And you've more or less implied this, but just to be clear, so you guys are strictly going to remain, you are beginning purely electric, and you will remain henceforth only working with electric vehicles. Is that correct?
Yeah, and electric vehicles, in which I would also include fuel cell type vehicles, also which are electric.
Should we get into a hydrogen fuel cell debate?
There's no reason to. It doesn't really. The infrastructure's not.
All right, good. That's pretty much all I was going to say. No, that's valid though. That's fair enough. I mean, why exclude them? Why artificially exclude them? But yeah, it sounds like we're on the same page there. Although I did see a funny post from somebody on Twitter. There was actually a line. I mean, I think 2 cars constitutes a line, right? There was a 2-car line at a hydrogen fueling station somewhere in LA. So I guess you need 3 of them to start to draw a trend line, but 2, you can connect those. Yeah. All right. Cool. So what happens next? So, like, is there anything, I mean, this is kind of open-ended, just throwing it out there to you if you'd like. I mean, what can we look forward to when, insofar as what are some big, I mean, because you mentioned earlier, you've already got a bunch of pre-orders. You just mentioned this a little bit ago. So what does that mean practically? Like, when will folks be able to actually, well, to the point of lining up, to actually queue up and subscribe to a vehicle?
I told the sales team that they can start signing off on orders actually this week or next, depending on when they're ready, when they feel comfortable. We, our biggest challenge is staying out in front of the CapEx buying curve with financing. I've got 30 vehicles that represent about $2.7 million in CapEx. They represent roughly $2 million in revenue over the next 2 to 4 years, and a lifetime revenue of 14 or 15 million. We are getting 4 to 5 qualified leads a day right now. We're doing a WeFunder campaign, wefunder.com/T4L. You can see what we're doing there. And we're getting about 30% of the investors want to be subscribers.
Wow.
And we haven't started selling yet. So we got about a $7 to $10 million CapEx backlog. Fortunately, I signed an LOI for a $10 million secured debt about 2 weeks ago. We're waiting on a firm term sheet from them this week. We are actively considering taking this company public and accessing public capital. And so those are probably the biggest challenge is just staying out in front of the capital curve, because orders don't seem to be the issue at this point.
That's remarkable. That's very cool. And since you just alluded to it, can we discuss the idea of going public through a SPAC or not?
We're actually looking at filing an S1 and going on NASDAQ.
Okay.
If there's a SPAC out there that's interested in talking to us, and we know there's a bunch of end-of-life SPACs, we would listen to anybody's pitch to us on that.
I mean, I only ask because obviously, as you well know, it seems that virtually every company in the automotive space, autonomous, electric, or otherwise, seems to be jumping on these things to go public. So it seemed a pretty appropriate avenue to consider, certainly. Huh.
Yeah. Again, we think we need to be public. We think it's a good idea to be public with this business. We represent the people and the public with this kind of business. We're not one manufacturer. And so, again, we would consider anything that allows us to go buy, $1 billion worth of vehicles.
Right, totally. And actually, do you have a few minutes left? I know we're kind of about to run over. Do you have a few minutes?
Yeah, no problem.
Cool. I was just curious, when you mentioned, buying up all these vehicles, I think it's quite plausible if I can anticipate some questions I might receive afterwards. So obviously it's become almost cliched these days. A lot of companies specifically not owning their own stuff, right? Whether you look at Uber or Lyft or whatever. And in this case, right, it is the case that you guys, T4L, will be owning the vehicles yourselves outright, correct?
Yeah.
So you're buying up the vehicles. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're buying the vehicles, and we probably will run them in a property management company similar to a real estate type of ETF or fund.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, that just isolates operating liability from the assets.
But in the situation then that you discussed earlier, where residential towers or offices get these vehicles for their tenants or for their employees, in those situations, who owns the vehicles outright? Is it still T4L or is it the office, the company?
It's still T4L.
Okay, right, because they're subscribing. Yep.
Yep, they're subscribing a fleet, an executive fleet, or a resort fleet of vehicles, or an office fleet of vehicles. Nobody wants to go spend. So let's say that I want 10 Tesla Model S's. Nobody wants to spend $1 million sitting there in the office. All right. It's much more affordable to spend $1,300 to $1,500 a month.
Yeah, totally. No, this is awesome. And to your point much earlier, I mean, I think sometimes it's very easy to lose sight of the kind of end game picture here, which is, again, with respect to EVs generally, not to mention just environmentally friendly things generally, this is hugely impactful for getting more people transition into EVs. I mean, even if they don't necessarily stick with them forever, at least it's opening the door, and it's kind of fast tracking this process, and especially by virtue of the fact that you guys aren't, wisely so, you're not just sticking to one brand, be it Tesla or whomever. This is just like a floodgate being opened of EV accessibility, not least of which because of the charging infrastructure you guys provide. This is fantastic stuff.
Well, that's why we're working really hard to make it happen, and it's a really exciting marketplace right now, and we're here to help drive the new business models and to make sure people have a really good experience and easy transportation experience.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, it sounds fantastic. I mean, I'm not doing a very good job of hiding my enthusiasm, so yeah, I'm very eager to see where things go. So, but let's see. So it's T4L.me, correct?
Yeah, T4L.me. You might want to hit the www.t4l.me. Mm-hmm. And we also have a crowdfunding offering going on at wefunder.com/T4L. And any questions, feel free to reach out anytime.
Awesome. Well, sounds good. Well, Alan, thanks very much. It's been great chatting with you about all this. And obviously, you know how to keep in touch, so please do. I look forward to chatting with you soon.
Okay.
Awesome.
Sounds good, Marc.
Thanks so much, Alan. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Well, that is a wrap for today. And indeed, this week. If you're a fan of this podcast, please don't forget to drop me 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. Until next time, have a wonderful rest of the week. I'll see you back here on Friday. Take care. Bye-bye.